you, which means you are subtly saying that Guru Nanak preached duality. No, Guru Nanak's philosophy is that of monism. Monism is when everything is one. We are all one, and that oneness is resonated time and again in the Granth Sahib. Khalak, khalak, khalak mein khalik. Kabir's words. Bhagat Ravidas's words, which I documented the remnants of the Sikh legacy across 36 cities and villages. Thereafter, I embarked deeper inside Pakistan, and this time I went into deeper in Punjab, Khyber, Kashmir, Balochistan, and Sindh, and covered 90 additional cities and villages for documenting the Sikh legacy remnants, which is there in the second book. In the process of making of the second book, the Divine was very kind, and that we will talk at the session at 6:15 p.m. when I'm going to screen a documentary called Peering Soul, basically to make a point that we've forgotten the vastness of our legacy. That is the documentary Peering Soul, which we'll screen today. But I've done another documentary called Peering Warrior, which is the Sikh legacy's martial remnants in Pakistan, the forts in the northwest frontier. At one time, there were 22 such forts. But with that background, I've always wondered, BBC has done a documentary on Alexander the Great, and his greatness was basically killing people, expanding territories. They've done one on Genghis Khan, and no one has thought of doing a documentary on Guru Nanak's travels when he was traveling for the message of oneness of mankind. Is he not worthy of it? Is it that somewhere we have faltered in telling the world about his greatness and his mission, that the Western world has not thought it to be worthy enough to document? Anyhow, I can't change that. But the skills that we've developed in the last 4.5 years to go into conflict zones and document what others are choosing not to do or have other limitations, that's the skill set we are applying in this major project. And what I want to share with you after this slide is what are the insights that we are getting from the field of the existing oneness, and also where that oneness has cracked. It's not reflecting the same fragrance as what Guru Nanak had visioned. These are contemporary insights as we are seeing them. But let me show you a 2-minute clip on what this project's about. Excuse me. Sound.
World of 15th century. In the borderless world of 15th century, people traveled distances to trade. Rulers invaded to expand territories, and Nanak glided across the geographies to spread the message of humanity. During his travels, Guru Nanak covered a large geographical tapestry, which in the 21st century comprised of 9 nations: Pakistan, India, China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. To break barriers across faiths by engaging in spiritual dialogues, Guru Nanak visited numerous Islamic, Sufi, Buddhist, and Hindu sites. Between 15th and 16th centuries, the universal narratives of Guru Nanak's travels were rendered only through oral traditions. In the 17th century, the oral narratives were strengthened by documenting them in the form of books, known as Janam Sakhis. Today, in the 21st century, the Janam Sakhis are forgotten, and division of geographies as sovereign nations have made many of the historic sites inaccessible. Thus, there is a compelling need to explore and fill the sites visited by Guru Nanak so that the faded memories can be kept alive. Allegory. which means the revelation of a hidden meaning, is a tapestry of Guru Nanak's travels. It will be the first documentary of its kind to chronicle the vast expanse of sites across 9 countries that were visited by Guru Nanak. Through an exploration and documentation of these sites in the 21st century, interspersed with narratives of the past, the universal message of Guru Nanak will continue to glide through generations.
Guru Nanak traveled, thank you. Guru Nanak traveled across 9 nations. We continue to send him further and further even today. He continues to travel. The fact is, he wrote nothing about his travels. He only wrote philosophy. It's the men of faith who 7 decades to 100 decades after his life started documenting. And in the 450 years thereafter, in the current text, it surprises me. Guru Nanak might soon reach USA and Canada too, don't be surprised. But we are sending him further and further. In making the documentary, we are trying to be as close to the primary sources, which are the oldest texts that are available. And based on that, Guru Nanak has traveled in 9 countries. And this is the map that shows the areas that he's traveled. The one message I want you to take from this slide is 70% of the geographical locations that he's traveled into are today in conflict zones or are not easily accessible. That's the challenge in doing this documentary. It's only the divine who can enable it, and therefore on the 11th of Jan 2019, me, my wife Nikki, who's here, if you can just stand up, she needs to be acknowledged too. Where is she sitting? She's here, please stand up. Both of us embarked on this journey, and we have been on the road for 9 months. But the good news is, in the 9 months, today when we are standing in front of you, we have finished 100% of mapping of Guru Nanak's travels in all the conflict zones and inaccessible zones. Guru Nanak's narrative is not about Gurdwaras. Gurdwaras were made after his life and are important to remember the events of his life, but his narrative is about the interfaith. He traveled to Islamic sites, Sufi sites, he traveled to Hindu sites, he traveled to the places where Jogis, the Gorakhpanthis used to sit and congregate. He went to all such sites. And across Pakistan, the dots that you see from the northern territories of Baltistan right down to Balochistan to Hinglaj Mandir, there are more than 45 such sites that we have forgotten because of partition, because our umbilical cords are severed from these lands. And our memories are limited to these 3 or 4 sites that you see on your right hand side. Tangible aspects are one, where you see the bricks and mortars and you make a story from that. Let me tell you some stories that are yet existing in a positive manner, a positive message. And I want to talk about Guru Nanak's best friend, Bhai Mardana, who traveled with a rabab in his hand to every place he went. What partition did, he was a Muslim who traveled with him. Faiths did not matter to them, oneness mattered to them. And what partition did was, the descendants of Bhai Mardana, who were sitting in Goindwal Sahib and Amritsar Sahib and doing kirtan in those places, were overnight pushed out and had to leave for Pakistan. Today, we have become so boxed that even if the descendants come to Amritsar Sahib, they will be not allowed to do kirtan in there because they don't look like me. That's the unfortunate severance of and a crack in Guru Nanak's philosophy. But in Pakistan, whom you're seeing, the 4 people sitting there, are descendants of Bhai Mardana, who for years, they are Bhai Lal's sons, have been doing kirtan 10 minutes they get every week at the Dera Sahib Gurdwara. They are the Muslim descendants. When I met them for the first time in 2014, I said, I want to go to your home. And they were hesitant. And they said, Sardarji, you're most welcome. or we hesitate because if you will come into a locality, no Sikh has come there, and if you are wearing a turban, our neighbors will pass judgments. I left it. But you know what? In 2019, when we went in this time with the grace of Guru Nanak to make a documentary, I asked them again. And with God's grace, their doors were open. This is a recording we are doing at their roof in their home. And I want to make you hear a small clip from their rendition at that point of time. It's a forgotten tradition because Bhai Mardana's descendants are not left in India. It's a forgotten tradition. But they have the DNA of Bhai Mardana. You know what? Let me tell you a very positive story. People without Bhai Mardana's DNA have also been motivated by Guru Nanak's message. Because in Pakistan, we have come across people who make an effort to congregate once every week, every Tuesday, and discuss Guru Granth Sahib, discuss Baba Farid, discuss Baba Bulle Shah, discuss Guru Nanak, and discuss the other poets in the Granth Sahib. One of the strands of that is in the music. Bhai Gulam Chand, who passed away he was descendant of Bhai Mardana, who passed away at the age of 90 plus in Lahore. This lady, a young Muslim lady, has spent some 15 years with him trying to learn Gurbani. We had a chance to go to her place and we did record some of her renditions. These are clippings not from our main cameras, these are clippings from our small video, our phones. So these will not be best in the quality, but we are using bigger cameras. But I want to show you what she's singing out here, what she has learned from the descendants of Bhai Mardana. She does not have a DNA, but this is an evolving tradition. Sorry. The traditions are yet alive. The question is, do we want to accept or do we want to have a narrative of divide and exclusion and keep hardening the boundaries around us? This is a question that I've started posing to myself since I have delved into these paths, because I think we have hardened ourselves too much. Let me take you with that note deep down into Sindh and Balochistan. You know, I often get asked this question on my works in the two books on the Sikh legacy in Pakistan, which you can see in the bookstore there. How many Sikhs are there in Pakistan? And I would always cynically answer back saying, you want a cookie cutter answer or you want a real answer? A cookie cutter answer is, like how I look, I'm a proud adherent of the Khalsa tradition, but like how I look, if you want to define a Sikh, then there are 11 to 12,000 Sikhs left in Pakistan. But you want the real answer? There are more than 800,000 people who believe in Guru Nanak across Pakistan. Who am I to judge you are not a Sikh when they themselves say that we are Sikhs? The entire belt that you see down there, which is shaded, 50 kilometers east of Indus River and going right up till the Iran border. Every Hindu there is a believer of Guru Nanak. Every Hindu has a Granth Sahib. The Pakistanis call them Hindus. We, the Sikhs, will call them Hindus. They call themselves Sikhs. So who am I to tell you what you are? Is a question I pose. Let me show you for yourself an example in a very remote village in Sindh.
Traveling across Sindh on the footsteps of Baba Nanak, we are making a point to take a break from our journey to experience what we do not see in the Punjab. Punjab, where Guru Nanak was born and preached the universal brotherhood, we have forgotten in those lands. And we find in Sindh, even though the communities are scant and a few people remaining in some villages, in this darbar, we are finding the in the Sindhi script, the Guru Granth Sahib, in the Gurmukhi script, the Granth Sahib, plus the Bhagavad Gita kept there. The beauty of this darbar is seen in the frescoes on the walls. Guru Nanak's fresco on this wall. Sindh is a place where faiths amalgamate, while the Punjabi Sikhs may find this to be unacceptable, but this is the beauty of the Nanakpanthi culture. They are very syncretic and they accept Sufism, Sikhism, as well as Hinduism. Guru Nanak and his philosophy remains to be the central fulcrum in these remote villages where you barely find one or two people holding on to the philosophy of Guru Granth Sahib.
And therefore I ask this question, who am I to say who you are? Because you are me and I am you. And therefore, with this small introduction of the contemporary insights in Pakistan, let me jump across into Afghanistan. We didn't know how we will enter Afghanistan. Even if we enter Afghanistan, how will I and my team traverse the paths which are deep inside Ghazni, Kandahar, Khost, Gardez, along the Para-Chinar border? How are we going to do that? Some of them are Taliban areas. But God helped us. What you see here are the dots in red where Guru Nanak traveled on his journey back from Makkah, Medina to Pakistan. And these red dots are all that we've covered. What you see on the right hand side in Khost, just along the Pakistan border, where one narrative says Bhai Mardana passed away in this place. The other narrative says he passed away in Kartarpur Sahib. We in our documentary will take him by the second narrative to Kartarpur Sahib. We don't know where he passed away. What narrative says there? There was a village there which had the Nanak Panthis, the Hindus and the Sikhs living, but all of them have moved away now. Here's the remains of a Gurdwara, which was in a memory of Guru Nanak's visit, but that's been shelled in the Afghan wars. That's what is left. We were fortunate that we were able to reach there. This is Nikki and our local companion. We're going into Taliban areas. We're traveling with our best way to manage how a woman should travel into these areas, but that's how the team has gone. Let me share with you on your left hand side a picture from our visit in the place called Khost. The locality's name is Prem Nagar. Not a single Nanak Panthi. I use the word Nanak Panthi. I don't use the word Hindu or Sikh. Not a single Nanak Panthi lives there anymore. Everyone's gone. When we reach there, this is the message of oneness. In Afghanistan, the oppressed and the oppressor are holding the AK-47 and the children. We've seen killings happening in front of us. Right in front of us, a vehicle has been shot at. And when we reached Prem Nagar, I call her the Iron Grandmom. The Iron Grandmom came to know that a turbaned Sikh has come to Prem Nagar. And she came out, and the affection that we saw and the warmth that we saw, that she actually exhibited. She said, after you've done your work, she sent her son with an AK-47 into that remains of the Gurdwara to visually document it. But she said, after you've done this, come home, I'm making vegetarian meal for you. But we were served the vegetarian meal under the AK-47's aura. And at Gardes, you know, I am sometimes cynical, I'm a bit eccentric enough that I feel that documentation of smallest of the narratives is important. And in my second book, I've documented that well in Pakistan, Tua Khalsa, where the first, in March 1947, the first attack on a Sikh village had happened. That narrative is suppressed. That's deep inside Pakistan. Foreigners are not allowed to go in there. And I went to just document that well. Similarly, in Gardes in Pakistan, on the way to Ghazni, we stopped at this place simply to document the site that had existed in the memory of Guru Nanak's travel. All the Sikhs, Hindus, Nanak Panthis have left from this land. And when we were there, the entire village came around. And this man, people who say, looks like my brother, he's a local Afghani, he comes by and he says, in his Pashto, which got translated for us, he says, come back. Come back, because I want you to make your place out here once again, because I want to eat langar out here as I used to eat when I was a small child. All I could do was to give him an embrace. That's the message of oneness, because it does exist. And as we went into Kabul, our aim was to find the descendants of those people who once used to go, they were the Muslim descendants, of the people who used to once come into the Gurdwara in Kabul and sing Kirtan. That's eloped, that's finished. Because the war and the migration of the communities, 250,000 Hindus and Sikhs are reduced to 850 people today in entire Afghanistan. These Gurdwaras and temples are lying in shambles. We were able to find the descendant whom we requested to sing for us. And this is him singing a kirtan in a traditional Afghani style. But all is not so great, because I said to you earlier, I'll also tell you where the fracture points are. Afghanistan, Kandahar, the last standing Nanak Panthi in Afghanistan. Let me tell you his name. Dr. Raghunath. In India, we will dismiss him of being a Sikh, because his name sounds like a non-Sikh Singh or a Kaur. Dr. Raghunath considers himself to be a full 100% Nanak Panthi. He believes in Nanak, reads the Granth Sahib. He's the last standing man. Why is he not moving from Kandahar? There are 15 temples in Kandahar, all in shambles. There were 5 Gurdwaras, all in shambles. One Gurdwara where he had a Granth Sahib, and he's the only man who would go there and read the Granth Sahib. The reason why he's not moving from Kandahar is, what he tells me is, this is the country that made me a doctor. I owe it back to this country. My family is gone, my kids have gone, but I will die in this place. That's his decision. But here's the crack. We define who can read the Granth Sahib, who can hold it. And therefore, some people, and I feel ashamed, visited his place about 5 months before we went there and decided that he does not know how to keep the Granth Sahib. And they took it away from him. And when I heard him, you'll see in this 15 seconds that he's talking about, see the pain in his voice.
दुख ये है कि मैं अगर धर्म पे कोई अच्छी तकन ग्रहण करे, मन बसावे, वो वैर विरोध बुराई कुछ समझे नहीं. नादान लोग जो समझदार लोग नहीं, ये सारा दुख है, सारी जगह च ये दुख है.
In spite of that, he says, Nadan log ne. That's his greatness. We need to think where the cracks are happening. Sri Lanka. People may think it's a tourist place. A large portion of Guru Nanak's narrative is in the northern territories. You see the two dots on top. The dots you see around Sri Lanka is what the documented tradition says where he traveled. But the upper area, Mannar and Jaffna, is still reeling from the aftermath of the LTT problems. Tourists have only been allowed to go into the northern areas only 1 year back. But we are going with a film crew. No one's going to give you permission in these areas to film. Leave alone fly drones. Because you wanted to fly drone from Mannar towards Rameshwaram to click the picture of those islands. Because Guru Nanak writes in the Granth Sahib, giving the example of the Setband, the islands which connects the goodness and the evil, which is he's representing in our heart, the goodness and the evil. It's the fight against that. He's talking about those set of islands, and we had to fly our drones in those areas. It's not easy because Navy and Army is on high alert there. But we've taken the risk, and God's been with us. We finish it out. But in the southern territory, there's a place called Kurukal Madam. Kurukal Madam, in the Tamil language, they say the Guru's village. The congregation gathers because of the Gurus coming here. We happened to reach there on the Pongal day. And we were invited by this family to have lunch with them to celebrate Pongal, a Tamil family, whose ancestors have told them that Guru Nanak had passed through this village on his way to Nuwara Eliya. That's the narrative that we were able to document there. And I feel the message of oneness was so beautiful that we landed there on the Pongal day and these people opened their doors for us and we had a meal with them discussing the various aspects of Guru Nanak's travels through Sri Lanka. Iraq, another conflict zone. Guru Nanak's travels from Makkah, Medina to Iraq brought him to Sheikh Balol's site. And there's one more site in Iraq. But our focus for both the sites, but this particular picture is of Sheikh Balol's site near the Qabristan. Even to get inside that place now, there are security cordons, you can't get inside. The Gurdwara is broken, Gurdwara is shelled, there's no one going there. It's next to the Sheikh Balol's Mazar. We managed to get inside. And we met, interestingly, the person that you see on the left-hand side, yours, Abu Yusuf. And he held our hands and shared that picture with us, which is on the right-hand side, of his grandfather, who used to take care of the Gurdwara. This is him coming out of the Gurdwara. What's written on top is in the local Persian script, basically, about the Guru Nanak's visit out here. And he remembered how his grandfather, when he was a young kid, used to take care of the Gurdwara. When the times were good, Sikhs used to come out here. The embassy used to have the staff. They used to come out here. Right now, the embassy staff doesn't even venture out. That's the kind of war zone this is right now. And we were fortunate that we were able to go there, not even to Baghdad, but we went further down south to Najaf, Karbala, because the old route from Makkah, Medina would come through that into Baghdad, and we were able to map the entire thing. Let me tell you the human values. Wherever we've traveled, I've understood that human conditioning is the most important, most challenging thing in our lives that we have to overcome. Because since we are born, we get conditioned by our parents, by our society, by our religious custodians, and we start thinking what we believe is right. But what we have learned in this journey is that people everywhere want love and they want to embrace each other. And I'm telling you, in Iran, Guru Nanak's travel has a very small documentation. It's basically in Mashhad, in Tabriz. Mashhad in Mashhad. Imam Ali Raza's site is where Guru Nanak actually visited while coming from Tabriz. But to go into this country, And to film is very tough because Iran is isolated from the globe. Recently, there was a case where one Australian couple went into Iran and they flew a drone and they are behind bars for the last 6 months. They don't know what's going to happen to them. We were fortunate that we were able to do our mission. But when we reached there, the whole skill in this mission is that you break barriers, you build friendship very quickly because you don't have time. Time is against you. And as you're traveling, we had our driver who was speaking in broken English, and we were traveling from Tehran. After a few hours, he started probing us, why are you here? What are you trying to do? And we started making friendship with him. When he understood our mission, you know what he did? The first mosque that came by, he stopped his car there, and he says, I want to go and pray. And he said, I want to pray for you all so that your mission succeeds in Iran. This is him going inside, and Nikki said, can I then follow you? Because he didn't say it, but he was praying, and we clicked this photograph of him doing the prayer inside the mosque. And to us, that's humanity, that's oneness. Because if you're doing the right thing, people will embrace you. That's what I believe. Also, faith-linked inaccessibility is another biggest challenge that we're facing. Many of the sites we have to find, no one's going to roll a red carpet for you. No one rolled a red carpet for the making of my 2 books on the Sikh legacy in Pakistan. We found a way to do it. No one's going to roll a red carpet for you. And similarly, the problem today is that the faith-linked inaccessibility to certain places makes your mission very tough. Saudi Arabia, Makkah, Medina, just because I'm a non-Muslim, I cannot go inside. But that's the rule of the land. It's not the rule by the Muslims. It's the rule of the Saudi Arabia government. And I can't fight that. But yet, we have attempted, we have found ways, and we have got the narrative completed for our documentary. This is on the field, our art director, Salman Alam, who's from Lahore, and Nikki in the deserts. And we are basically doing a drone shoot out there. But we've done all this. And I want to come back. I said we've done 7 countries. We've got 2 countries, Bangladesh and India left. I want to talk about a little bit about Tibet, the last country, where I want to leave a little bit of story. Tibet, China is a big place. But what you see is Guru Nanak's travel is only on the left-hand side, on your left-hand side. Because they entered from Himachal, went up till Kailash Mansarovar, turned back, and from Pangong Tso Lake, entered into India and went through Ladakh and up into Baltistan in Pakistan. That's the path we had to trace. But to get there, we had to go all the way to Chengdu, from there go to Lhasa and get into this place. What you're seeing there is Kailash Mansarovar. Kailash, and the base is the Mansarovar lake, where Guru Nanak had come and he had a discourse with the yogis, the Kanfatta yogis out here. Here's the message I would like to leave from our own experiences with the art director, Salman Alam, my own experiences, which makes me feel that we are blessed to have a team that's so motivated. Because you know what? Going up on that height, you will touch 19,000 feet in a matter of 2 days. 19,000 feet to hold a C300 Mark II on your shoulders is like you're going to be holding a huge bag load of bricks, right? That's the kind of weight that it feels because oxygen is so low. And when we reached those places and we started filming, Salman developed altitude sickness. The only solution of altitude sickness is no medicine works. You're risking your life. You've got to get down fast. That's the only solution. And for me, I'm thinking, God, we've got to come back to Tibet. It won't happen this time. And I'm already preparing that we can't risk his life and we must retreat. And here's where the message of oneness comes. Salman, he's breathing, huffing, panting, throwing up, vomiting. And I know he's been hit by altitude sickness. He's holding the camera and he says, Nahi Amardeep Saab, ab nahi chhodna isko, ab karke hi jayenge. That's the risk that boy has taken on his life. To me, that's the message of oneness. I'm proud to say that Guru Nanak's documentary is being made by a team comprising of we as Sikhs, me and my wife, Salman Alam, Fahad from Pakistan who've gone into all the Islamic countries and the other countries, the 7 countries that they've done. And now we can't bring them into India because the politics of the 2 countries will not allow that. And now as we start our narrative in India and Bangladesh, our team is changing. And now we are having a Hindu team. Deepak Verma will be leading the team. It's a documentary being made by Hindu, Muslim and Sikhs in the name of oneness of Guru Nanak. With that, I'm going to end this. The fact is that I repeat, the only one message that we've learned is human beings want to love each other. Let's not make our boundaries so hard that we can't embrace each other in love. That's the message of Guru Nanak. With that, I'm going to stop this presentation. We are dot on time. We have been given 10 minutes for question answers. I'm happy to take any question answers. Mic, please. I think people now behind will not be able to hear. One second. Can you just get the mic?
Yeah. 1 second, please.
Well,
I'll repeat the question. You please carry on.
last year, we had the good fortune of traveling to Arunachal. Thanks, of course, to Anant and Aparna. Now, we went to a place called Shungetsar, which is way beyond, on the way to Bumla. And somewhere there, in the middle of nowhere, there's a cave-like thing. It was all icy. The Jawan who was traveling with us stopped the vehicle and did one namaste and said, Guru Nanak Ji came here. And the entire lot of troops who are posted there revere that particular God-forsaken place, saying Guru Nanak Ji actually came there on his way to Tibet. Could that be true?
So we are dealing in a realm of faith, right? Faith has its own ways of growing its tentacles. All I can say is that between the narratives that were written in Janam Sakhi's 7 decades after his lifetime to the ones that have been written much later, 150, 200 years, and even now the historians who are writing, Guru Nanak continues to travel. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? He continues to travel. Men of faith will always like their person to be better and more achieving than others. The fact is, I always say, I don't know where Guru Nanak has traveled. I don't know, don't ask me. Because all I know is Guru Nanak only wrote philosophy and how to live your life. He didn't write where he traveled. The closest he gave an indication was Babur attacks Punjab. We say it was at Aminabad, but he doesn't say that. And he's written Babur Wani of the attack, and he talks about Khurasan Khasmana Aya, Hindustan Daraya. He came from Khurasan and he Hindustan ko daraya. But he's not saying where he was. He's written nothing. The men of faith wrote 7 decades afterwards. That's the closest primary text that we have. And we are choosing as filmmakers to only follow that. As per that, Guru Nanak has not traveled to these places. Now, having said that, something that I question to myself, please don't get me wrong, something I question to myself, why is it that these places, which we are talking about, Guru Nanak has traveled to, in Sikkim, on the way to Bumla, I've seen that place, I've seen it myself, I've been to Bumla Pass, or Ladakh. Why are these places only opened up post 1970s by the Indian Army soldiers? And then the faith today in the 40 years, 50 years is that Guru Nanak has traveled there. I don't know. I've told you how we are doing our job, and I'll just leave it there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the last about 1
Can you
month,
take the mic, please?
for the last about 1 month, I have been visiting some libraries, particularly the Sikh reference libraries. I would like to know from you, what has Khushwant Singh written? I'm trying to search. Some chapters are there. What is his contribution? Or has he, talked about all the countries where Guru Nanak has visited and what you have done a very good job. You're doing it. That is one question. Well, I have not been able to. I wanted to read. He's written volume 1, 2, about Sikh Raj, even the...
Can I take that question first? So Khushwant Singh has written about history of Sikhs in 2 volumes. He's not gone into the depths of Guru Nanak's travels, because Guru Nanak's travels, as are written by the men of faith a few years after his life, are big texts that you have to kind of cull out the information, the spiritual information, what's the message he's leaving, where is he traveling. It's a very deep subject. If you want to read where Guru Nanak has traveled, there are very, very deep texts, and separately I can tell you, you can come to me.
I have been going through, but I was very keen to, particularly before coming here, I was very keen to know his contribution in this.
So
thank you.
he's written, but he's written not enough for us to make a document.
My second question is that your documentary is going to be very well made. What message do you have at this juncture for the politician of both the countries,
Which countries?
India and Pakistan?
Well, I look at it 9 countries. I look at why should I look at India and Pakistan? My domain is not India and Pakistan. My domain in Guru Nanak's travel is 9 countries. Politicians are the same everywhere. After this, you need to take it behind also, because the people are raising hands behind.
Mahesh Chhabra here. You said Salman had a problem at 9,000.
19,000.
Yeah, 19,000. I went to Kailash Mansarovar, but I took cylinder with me. I have being little asthmatic. But for you being traveling so much, next time I think you can get cylinders, to your friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Rest assured, I'll tell you, we have taken all precautions and the biggest precaution that we've taken is the blessings from the God himself, the divine himself. That's what is making us run. We have all the things, but Kailash Mansarovar is sitting at about 16,000. Yeah, and we're talking about certain passes that come at 19,000. The fact is the fittest of the person can be hit with Mount altitude sickness even at 10,000 feet. It's not about your fitness, or it's not about it can hit anyone, right? So you can't predict it.
I compliment Samadip. It's a tremendous job you're doing.
Thank you.
And you have been doing. I've been following it now for several years. One question. As you yourself said that the travels were written in the Janam Sakhis is where you find, because Guru Nanak himself did not write. You don't mention what Bhai Gurdas wrote.
Yes.
Bhai Gurdas was much closer.
Yes.
And he does say Baba Gya Bagdas and so on.
Yeah.
And so that is a very important primary source,
Yes.
which I think you may want to acknowledge.
Yeah.
at
No,
some
absolutely.
stage. But that's not a question. The question is, because once we've all tried to research this order of travel, how are you determining the order of the journeys? Because the Udasis differ. The Janam Sakhis all differ. Some Janam Sakhis say only 3 Udasis. Some Janam Sakhis say 4 Udasis. Because what you're going to do is, for all practical purposes, for people going to become history. It's going to become real. So how do you decide that he went from Himachal to Tibet and came back?
Right.
What is your
So-
definitive source?
Right. So let's first and foremost, yes, thank you for reminding that Bhai Gurdas ji. Yes, he's the closest. From a filmmaker's perspective, Bhai Gurdas ji gives a decent mention where he talks about him going to Baghdad, him going to Makkah, Medina, him going to Batala. He mentions 4-5 places, but it's not big enough for us to make a narrative. Yes, it's a primary source. And he says he traveled far and wide. That itself is an affirmation that he traveled far and wide. The travel routes are not given in a structured manner in any of the Janam Sakhis. They are very haphazard. And it's the work of the historians, the ones who analyze these things from different sources to come up with the narratives. Even in those works, there's a lot of disparity, right? And we as a filmmaker are not trying to recreate the wheel, because we've got a big task on the field itself. We're trying to find the sites and recreate a narrative. So we've taken Dr. Kirpal Singh's assessment, because I'll tell you why. Because I've traveled far and deep in Pakistan, and I'll tell you, he makes sense to me. Because when he travels from Nankana to Pakpatan, it's a long distance. And there is no other historian that I'm finding who tells me what happens in between. Because I've traveled so deep inside Pakistan in these small villages. These villages have gurdwaras which are all in ruins, abandoned, and they're known as Chota Nankiana Gurdwara. the Chota Nankiana Gurdwaras were made in the oral tradition of Guru Nanak's travels. Now, I have no way to validate what the oral tradition is right or no, but they are on the path from Nankana to Pakpatan. So that gives me from all the sources that I'm looking at, Kirpal Singh's one comes out to be the most, the one which we are following, and as per that, the Udasis are not discreet. Because the fact is, he was traveling. We are trying to tell you his narrative from his birth till his end, how he goes. If he comes and takes a break at Nankana, so be it. To me, it's not a discrete element that I'm trying to break it down into.
You will introduce this kind of flexibility for your audience.
Absolutely. Because to me, the world is not discrete. It's a life that we are trying to document, right? Thank you very much.
One last one. Sorry, I know the bells are going. Can you take it?
I don't see this side.
Can you take one?
We are running on a very tight schedule. The other people are ready now.
Okay.
Lives to save the trees that the Maharaja of Jodhpur wanted to fell to build a palace. The love for earth and its nature is embedded in our culture, which we have turned a blind eye to, till a Greta Thunberg calls the young ones to wake up and help preserve their ecological future. So we are more than happy to immerse ourselves in Ganesh Saili's Wandering Through the Garhwal Himalayas with its poetic language and pictures. Ganesh Saili, a photographer and mountain trekker, is perhaps the best person to draw our attention to what's threatening the delicate ecology of these mountains that stand like sentinels to the north of India. In conversation with him is Kiran Chadda, author of Dalhousie Through My Eyes, which is a pictorial history of almost 2 decades, 2 centuries. She has founded an NGO, Swachh Dalhousie, Clean Dalhousie. Pooja Marwa will also join this ecological conversation. She lives in Dehradun and is very familiar with Ganesh Saili's work and the terrain that we are talking about. So I invite Ganesh and Kiran Chadda and Pooja Marwa. Please come on the stage.
पूजा जब बोलने लगेगी तो मुझे ये चलानी है, वो बस ऐसे ही चलानी है। मेरा चला।
Hello and welcome to our session. This session is dedicated to Greta Thunberg for the wonderful work that she is doing to tell all of us what we are leaving behind for our children. Right here with us, Mr. Saili, whom I fondly refer to as North Star for reasons obvious. He is here than he did. He once said that Kasauli is the place where kissing is always in season. I'm sure, thank you. I'm sure some of you would want to debate, but hear me out. There is a trail here called Gilbert Trail, also known as Lover's Lane. And I'm sure if you walk down that path at any time of the day or night, you would get a serenade by gorgeous birds for all the gentlemen sitting here. There is a pun intended on that. So walk down that trail, have a nice walk. I'm actually referring, on a serious note, to the yellow-billed blue magpie that is very prevalent in these areas. Now, besides the kissing, the Kasauli Brewery was originally owned by Edward Dyer, father of the infamous General Reginald Dyer. It's 100 years now after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and even a thought about that fateful day gives us all goosebumps. Mr. Saili here has a very interesting take on General Dyer's widow, whom he knew of in Missouri.
Oh, it was a very long research on the mountain that I had done a few books on Missouri. And during this research, I met this very nice watercolor painter, Jim Keelan. And slowly during the research, it fell together that his mother was General Dyer's widow, Jim Keelan's mother. And they ran that school in Missouri called Vincent Hill, which is now the Guru Nanak 5th Centenary School at the western end of town. And she probably went up there and married his father, who was then, later, written about by George Everest's diaries. He didn't like him at all. So he always said catty things about him, his father. He said, it's impossible to be more stupid than Keelan. And I said, who was this Keelan? And my research on the little place where I live in Missouri, interesting things fall together like a jigsaw puzzle. Things fall together, and this is just one of them, Pooja.
Thank you.
She lived up there and
Tell
died
us
up
about
there.
Mullingar. Who was Captain Frederick Young?
Oh, Frederick.
How did Mullingar in Missouri get its name?
Missouri got its name from the Mansour bush that grows up there, the Nepiland Coriana, which is growing in abundance there. It's also called the Mansour bush. So probably from Mansour you went to Missouri. The old-timers still call it Mansouri. The labor still that came in there, they say Mansouri ja rahe hain. Missouri nahi jata koi. And over the years, of course, we date back to 1815, the end of the Gurkha Wars. A lot of army personnel there, so ex-servicemen here. So this came at the end of the 1815, at the end of the Gurkha Wars, when General Jolo Gillespie came up into the valley of the Doon, if some of you are familiar with that area, came into the valley of the Doon, and the Gurkhas had been there 20 years in Garhwal and Kumaon, and they're getting rather cheeky, and they would make forays into the British outposts. And at some point, I guess, the East India Company had enough, and they said, let's go. And so they said these troops ki thode se Gurkha honge, inhe jara fix karke aana. They had no idea what they were going into. In this little place in Dehradun, there's a little hill called the Nalapani Hill. And on this little fort were a few Gurkhas and their women and their families. They were living. And mind you, they were not those massive stone fort, just a basic stockades, lakdi se, between bushes and those stones and sticks and stones and nothing else. These forts were made out of the General George Gillespie, hero of Jaffna. He came in and he said, let's go, fix them. The first day, without much checking out, he took his guns out and he attacked them, got shot, got killed. He was the first casualty of the Gurkha Wars. And then they said, we're up against a very brave race of people. So they stepped back, and what was supposed to last 3 days lasted 3 months. And they just didn't know what to do. They were up against General Barbhadra, the Nepalese general. Small anecdote, if you permit me, that comes to mind is about this general one evening. He sends a letter to Balbhadra saying, you better surrender, we are surrounded. So Balbhadra looked at the letter and he says, not customary to disturb a general in the evening. And having said that, thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go on to Dr. Chadda, whose family has been in Dalhousie since the 1800s. Doctor, would you please tell us about the family and how they came there, and about your NGO called Swachh Dalhousie?
Let me first, in memory of Khushwant Singh, thank Rahul and Nilofer for having me here. And I want to acknowledge the presence of my brother who's come specially, Major General Plaha, and all my Sacred Heartian friends and my batchmates. With that, I begin with Dalhousie. Dalhousie, my hometown, my love. In fact, Dalhousie and the quest for this book started not only as a pictorial history, but as a historical facts and figures, and through folklore and fables that I wanted to know what Dalhousie was all about. In fact, after my retirement, when I went back and I asked a couple of people, when did the municipal council start? Blank. I asked them, how long is the way to Pathankot or Chakki Bank? Blank. How far away is Khajar? Why do we have the temple there? Why is a tree called the Pandava trees? I was drawing blanks and I thought, let me search and research. So I started with meeting old people, young, the chowkidars who are a storehouse of knowledge, and my quest began to write this book on Dalhousie. Dalhousie is a quaint hill town, 80 kilometers from Pathankot, and it is spread over 5 hills, and the founding of it through the British came through a chance hunting expedition when the Raja of Chamba invited these Britishers who had come to survey the area for a possible sanatorium to come and see the hounds and the wolves and the cheetah that they thought they would find. And this guy, Dr. Clemenger and Colonel Napier, they just fell in love. And the 5 hills were taken for a paltry sum of less than 2,000 rupees, because that's what they excused from the protection that they've given to the Raja of Chamba. And they started building, but the Britishers knew how to build. So they started with the barracks, all sorts of timber, the wooden structures, and that's where my family stepped in. They could do with the Britishers, they could do with the locals, they couldn't do without traders and without those who would run the town. So my family of Plahas, they walked in 1880. We have a village, Surki Gala, from where the first brick kiln was started through Surki. Surki is the name of that red mitti there, and Gala is the valley. So the brick started, and my great-grandfather Hiralal was the only guy without whom no timber auction could take place. Now I have an interesting feature that nobody was allowed to go on a horseback during the British period, no Indian. But my great-grandfather, he would always ride the horse, and our village was a little away from the cantonment areas. So he once walked into this Charing Cross, which is now known as Subhash Chowk, and this sergeant asked him, get off. So my great-grandfather, Hiralal, just gave him a couple of expletives and kicked the horse and was in Surki Gala before these people could follow. So that's how my great-grandfather was, and I think that my fiestic nature comes from him. And I went to Mansarovar in the year 1996 at age 46, without oxygen cylinder, touched 19,800, and I think that's the hallmark of my physical strength. And with that, I take you to Dalhousie. Why I love Dalhousie. Dalhousie is where I've learnt the simple living, the simple people, and how we have moved in with them. I have learnt through Sacred Heart, my college, the values of life, the discipline, the honesty, and how to treat everybody alike. We had to do work for the poor. We had to help them in their tasks. We would ourselves do labor. And most important was that we used to visit the church, the Gurudwara, and the R.S. Maj Mandir, as well as the churches all together. And my mother was responsible for this, because she used to say, Sab dharam ek hai. And I think I'm following from what Amarjeet said.
I'm just going to interrupt you here, Dr. Chadha. Speaking of timber, there is a very interesting story on how Pahari Wilson floated timber down. So, sir, would you please share with us?
Yeah, Pooja is going to push me into this one. Huh?
Apology. That is our subject session.
We're talking of the environment and of where I come from, where Chipko Andolan that was referred to began, and we have lopping, it's a very green area where I come from, the Garhwal Himalayas and the Kumaon Himalayas. And we've had a lot of deforestation happen, and deforestation is not just us, independent India. It began with a man called F.E. Wilson, Frederick E. Wilson. Frederick E. Wilson's story is an amazing story. It's a story of rags to riches. He came up here as a deserter from the East India Company times and came to Missouri, became a school teacher. Funny how stories start with school teachers. But he became a school teacher.
You've taught at LBS for the
I
normal
taught at
staff.
yes, I did. So he moved from there. He went to the bar. Funny how stories all end up in a bar. Huh? So he went to the bar. The bartender tells him, he says, "What are you doing teaching? You should be trophy hunting." Remember, it was very popular in those days to have trophies around your house. It's frowned upon today. And today you need to get a license under the Wildlife Act to have a trophy in your home. And in those days, of course, the railways were moving into India. Wilson was an entrepreneur. He said, "Hey, let's get this wood." No one could think about it up in those where I come from. There were no roads, remember? And so he chopped these trees, floated them down the Bhagirathi and the Alaknanda, the rivers, and collected them at Hardwar for free. And he decimated the Harsil Valley and destroyed a lot of forest. But railways, and like I said, railways were coming to India. You needed sleepers, and the empire was moving on. And the good news is, all those forests are green again. I've been there. I've trekked in that valley, the Bilangana Valley, the Bhagirathi Valley, and our trees always triumph. My theory is, nature always triumphs, one way or the other. I mean, we're too puny for what the forces that we deal with. One earthquake, the Kangra earthquake, if you remember, decimated up till Mussoorie. The water in the McKinnon Brewery, which we had up there, the equivalent of the dial thing here.
So the 20 books that you have done in over 25 languages, are they also on afforestation? What are your books about?
Lots. My books are Pooja, to answer that honestly, is that my books are basically about the Himalayas, and that's the area in which I specialize. And I spent a lifetime, I've had the good fortune of being able to live in the hills, and I come from the hills. My ancestors came from the hills, and that's a whole other story.
Thank you. We come back to Dr. Chadha. I believe Rudyard Kipling spent a fair share of his time at Dalhousie.
Before I talk about Rudyard Kipling, I'd like to mention that there was Chief Seattle in 1854 when trees were being chopped off in the name of development in America. He said, "To harm the earth is to heap contempt on the Creator." And I think this suffices for all of us to realize how important trees and maintaining and preserving our climate, preserving our environment, our natural resources is to us. So what Rudyard Kipling said was, he used to come there as an 18-year-old, from 18-year-old onwards, when his sister was convalescing from a disease, and he would say Dalhousie is the finest but the wettest, and it is also the dullest. So when somebody questioned him why the dullest, he said in terms of social connections, people don't come out of their houses because they enjoy the rains.
So what about the skirts don't get scullied?
Yeah. And then during the British period, when there were no roads, so the women had to come in their long skirts, the British women, and the locals were asked to pave the somewhat kacha roads with this mud. And why? Because the women with the prams and their skirts, so that skirts don't get sullied, and the prams and the parasols move on that region. I forgot to mention about my NGO. I'm working on Swachh Dalhousie and Clean Dalhousie, and we started before Prime Minister Modi started his NGO. We did 18 drives, we did this, rallies, we did marathons, and we tried to clean it to the extent possible, but then khads are not easy to clean. Now we have roped in Re-City, which Ganesh knows. They've done this in Mussoorie, and they are doing supported by the Municipal Council and supported by my NGO. We are trying to clean Dalhousie, starting with separating the dry and the wet waste, not only in terms of the garbage bins, but also where they dump it in the end, where a solid waste management plant is coming up.
Thank you so much. There is a notorious threesome that I have to tell you about. Have any of you been to Missouri, to Savoy? I'm sure a few of you have. So you would know of the Writers' Bar. There is a little history that I have to share. This is the notorious threesome, as they call themselves. Mr. Sally here, Ruskin Bond, and a gentleman called Nandu. And this story is one that I'm going to have him tell you himself.
Confession time this is. Yeah, we were all, I've had the good fortune of knowing Ruskin Bond for about 50 years of my life. And, even I remember when Khushwant Singh ji was editing the weekly, he was the one who asked Ruskin to write about the Gadwalis. And that Ruskin's never looked back since that happened. And what do you want? Okay, we were young 40 years ago. Ruskin and I were pretty young. And we used to...
Bonding over alcohol.
Like I said, it wasn't about the boozing, it wasn't about the cruising. It was about fellowship. We are social animals, we need to chat with somebody. And, and it was all about sitting down and, each one with our own different set of problems.
Right.
His monkey's on his back, his monkey's on his back. And none of us wanted all the monkeys on one man's back. So we'd sit down in the evening, our monkeys would rest, and we'd relax. That was the kind of life we had. Yeah.
So while we speak of monkeys on back, let's talk about, I'm sorry, the late Mr. Chadda, because Mrs. Chadda has a very nice, interesting story to share on her late husband.
Before that, I must tell you about the Miss Stiffel's Bar, which is still operative in Dalhousie, and where these Britishers, when they started losing out on many things, would sit and while quaffing chota pegs, would discuss about the decline of the British Empire. So that bar is operative. I welcome all of you to come and join us there. Nevertheless, I had the most charming husband, but the most important part was that when he proposed to me, he asked me, what sort of a boy do you want to marry? And I said, I don't know whom I'll marry, but I like to marry the guy who pampers me the most. And I am very proud to say that I was pampered for all the 42 years we were together. And
you also said dancing.
And of course, for the dancing, I told him, if you don't dance, then I'm not going to marry you.
I mean, her reason to say yes was
And
because
then
he said
it was
yes.
Dalhousie. He fell in love with Dalhousie. Whether first with Dalhousie with me, I still don't know. But just outside the mall, there are two peaks called the Bride and the Bridegroom, which is very significant. And but the local people call it the Paap in the Punya Mountains. That is exactly what he was seeing when he proposed to me, and I think that's very romantic. And I am romantic by heart. I live life fully, and my book is also quite romantic.
Thank you. So as you leave here,
one more thing about the old times I want to tell you about is the artist and filmmaker Sarabjit Singh mentioned, this finds mention in my book. In 1920, he was telling that his great-grandfather was Sardar Makhan Singh, who convinced Major Bruce, the GOC of Lahore district, to allow Indians to come to Dalhousie. In their conversation, what did Mr. Major Bruce say? Sardar, you are a friend of the Raj and a grand man. A person like you, when in such salubrious climate of Dalhousie, thinks of good things and the prospects of the empire and the loyal subjects of the Raj. But these average Indians and ye badmash log, ye aadmi log sab badmash hai, in a climate like that of Dalhousie, will think only of sedition and rebellion. And for very, very long, he did not agree to allow Indians to come, either other Hindus, other than some aristocracy from Lahore and Jalandhar. He did not allow till our family was.
thank you. So as you leave here, we want to leave a part of all our hearts with you. We have a small presentation on the Writers' Bar, which we feel is apt for everyone sitting here, because you are here for the KSLF. And before I conclude, I would like to also read out a small poem by Shri Khushwant Singh Ji. When I remember all the friends so linked together, I've seen around me fall like leaves in wintry weather. I feel like one who treads alone, some banquet hall deserted, whose lights are fled, whose garlands dead, and all but he departed. The glory of the mountains will always go on and on to inspire the next. Thank you.
Lovely.
Maybe please.
आवाज चक्को
At the New York Film Show and the Dada Saheb Phalke Film Festival.
This is the writer's bar. We used to come, I think, for what is called fellowship, for being with friends. It was not about losing, it was not about cruising. It was about being with friends. We enjoyed each other's company, and we would come and sit on those half-sprung sofas. And it used to be great fun to be here because it was a strange phase in our lives. Nandu was going through the phase with the hotel, and we were going, those were, tourism hadn't picked up, the Indian middle class had not gone ballistic, and there was tough times for the hotel, but we would come in here and have a great time. We would at times carry our own booze, we'd bring our own eggs wrapped in old newspapers, we'd give it to the waiter, he'd take it to the kitchen, get a clean plate, put it on that, put all his namak and the salt and pepper on top, bring it back for us to eat, and it used to be fun. One time, Nandu happened to go to Singapore, and he stayed at the historic Raffles Hotel, and the thoughts stole upon him, gently like a thief at night, that his bar must have a name. So he came back, flush with this idea, that let's give this bar a name. So we looked at him skeptically and said, Nandu, how can you compare the Raffles with us? He said, nay, bar is a bar. How can a bar be without a name? So we decided, we sat down We were very reluctant to give it a name. And Nandu persevered. He said, no, we call it the writer's bar. Look, there are two of you, you're writer, nah. I said, I'm a typewriter, Ruskin's a writer. So he said, well, that makes, anyway, you also scribble Ganesh, so we can include you as a writer. So we started off, there were two writers. Then he said, why don't you include Jim Corbett? So we said, come on, give me a break. Jim Corbett was shooting in Garhwal. He would be hunting tigers down in leopards and tigers down in the Kumaon and Garhwal area. And he said, no, but he must have fought by sometime. His parents were married here. Jim Corbett's father, by the way, was a postmaster in Missouri and was a widower. And so was his wife. She'd lost her husband in the war. And so the two of them married up here. And it's true that Jim Corbett's parents were married at St. Paul's Church up in the Land of Cantonment. But Jim Corbett wasn't even born here. But anyway, we said, chalo, reluctantly, so we got a few names together. Then we said, he said, Perles Buck, I've got a picture with Perles Buck. She came here in 1960 to meet the Dalai Lama. We said, no, she didn't only meet the Dalai Lama, she came to Woodstock school as a chief guest. And so she came to Woodstock for this graduation ceremony as a chief guest, but she never had a drink in her life. She didn't write one word about this town. And her association was that she came to school, met the Dalai Lama in Happy Valley, full stop. Then, of course, we started fishing around for names. We realized that there were indeed people who did live in Missouri and did, write about the town. And starting with John Lang, the Australian-born novelist, he spent the last 5 years of his life in Missouri and wrote The Forger's Wife, Botany Bay, and of course he contributed to Charles Dickens's magazine Household Words in England and writes a beautiful essay in it on the Himalaya Club here and the flippant way we spent our life. Of course, John Lang is famous for having defended the Rani of Jhansi in litigation with the British. John Lang was a bar at law and he died in Missouri and is finally buried, to be buried in the Campbellsburg Cemetery. Then there's Philip Mason. Philip Mason wrote several books. He was a commissioner of Garhwal. His actual name was Philip Putra. And he wrote his famous book, seminal work, is called Matter of Honor, about the civil services in India. So we included his name. Then we went down the list of Stephen Alter. Stephen Alter is, of course, American author, Missouri-born, and he has written some 20 books, a brilliant author. Then there's, you have John Masters. He spent his youth here with the Gurkha Rifles in Dehradun. And Peter Hopkirk I met he has a lovely sketch on of the coffee shop out there in his book, In Search of Kim. And it's a book in which he sets out looking for Kim. Peter Hopkirk made lovely sketches of the coffee shop, and so we said, let's include his name. Then you have Rudyard Kipling, the first British author to win the Nobel Prize. And he, of course, was in Missouri, and his contribution is about 4 lines of poetry to this town, but he has used that image that is embedded in the minds of all those who have seen these mountains. He describes the ramp of Missouri in Kipling. That ramp, that when you sit in Dehradun and you look up at Missouri, it's like a gentle ramp into the sky. And he has Kim and the Lama start their journey into the mountains on the ramp of Missouri. Okay? And then you have, apart from that, Charles Allen. He wrote a book, he wrote several books on I think 6 generations of his family were in India. And one of his works that I like is Kipling Saab, in which he talks about Rudyard Kipling and the Indian connection. And then Nandu looked a little happy. He said, oh, we've got a few writers. So now where do we get the plaques from? So brass was too much work. So we
went to the local coffin maker, and the local coffin maker, he made these on his lathe, and over the weekend we hammered these plaques into the wall, had the local signboard writer write their names, and it started off as a bit of a joke, but it is true that Novotel has a writer's bar as close to this. Ruskin Pond himself has done some 200 titles. You know, there is no match for Ruskin Pond's writing, and I always tease him that whenever future historians will write of this town, they shall say he was the Kipling of Missouri. I remember this Ukrainian couple that came with their little child. The little child was the height of the table, maybe 3-year-old or 2.5 years old, and the child was stumbling through the bar and making these tables narrow.
Thank you.
So, before we end, we've heard the bell already, that other than Rudyard Kipling and Raizada Hansraj and Pahari Gandhi and Pandit Nehru, Nanak Singh, Manjit Baba, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, it was Tagore who was most inspired by Dalhousie. I read one sentence from his reminiscences, in which he was a 12-year-old boy and used to walk up with his father to this area in Dalhousie. And he said, the terraced hillside as we went up were aflame with flowering spring crops. Every morning we made a start after bread and milk, and before sunset took shelter in the next staging bungalow. My eyes had no rest the livelong day. So great was my fear lest anything should escape them. Why, oh why had we to leave such spots behind, cried my thirsting heart. Why could we not stay on there forever? Tagore.
Thank you.
I think we should say a big thank you to Pooja for this wonderful...
No, thank you. It was a pleasure, and thank you all for listening to us so patiently and seeing our film. Do we have any questions? Thank you.